Okay.
I suppose at the same time, it's probably good if Brian doesn't hear. So, I mean, I've only seen a relatively small amount of Brian's work. I know I originally saw his work back in, God knows, like the mid-90s in London, I think was the first time I saw him perform with a stunning piece of work. I think, if I'm right, it was called The Were, as in werewolf. It was all about the moon, and it was a 3-day durational performance in Max Gallery, which took place during night. So it was about sort of 6 hours each day over during the night time. It was all linked to the moon. Hello, Brian. And this particular piece, I'm mentioning it, it's The Were, isn't it? This piece you did Matt's way back in the 90s. It's difficult to explain. It was a very complex and beautiful and very sculptural, durational, performative installation. Because Brian's work is amazingly diverse in many ways. He's a sculptor originally, I guess, a sculptor, a poet, some extraordinary poetry, I have to say. I'm not myself a great fan of poetry, but Brian's poetry is really quite extraordinary work. It is genuinely sculptural poetry.
It's a bit like being dead.
And of course the performance work. So it is, and I think, but each of his works mixes elements from all areas of his artistic investigation. So particularly with a couple of these performative installations I've seen, they are very much based around a sense of sculpture, a sense of space, and really as Brian being a performative object or a performative sculpture or just a presence within these often very complex constructs he's created. But one thing, I mean, which was maybe one element of Brian's work which for me is a very strong element, which Brian may totally disagree with, which is maybe a start for a discussion, which also is maybe would be maybe a bit harder to get out of this particular performance. But for me, there is a very strong element in Brian's work, and I haven't really found the right words for this, so this is a bit of the arcane, and essentially the mystical. It's sort of an arcane, it's an aesthetic in a sense of arcane mysticism, but a quite modern sense of mysticism. It's a post-mid-19th century sense of mysticism. It's a post-industrial revolutionary sense of mysticism. And it's sort of mixed up with, for me, a very British sense of a certain element of eccentricity and almost surrealism. There are surrealist elements, I believe, in Brian's work. But I particularly want to sort of highlight this idea of, as I say, what do you call it, mysticism. That sounds a bit too strong, a little bit too airy-fairy but there's, I suppose the other word for it which I was thinking of is the uncanny. And I think this is also maybe came across a little bit here. Like the almost the Freudian sense of the uncanny, unheimlich, auf Deutsch. And there's definitely the sense of uncanny, the psychological disturbance in Brian's work. For me, his work is often a little bit disturbing, in a sort of psychological sense of disturbance. And actually, one thing, and to bring this whole sort of sense of weird arcane mysticism together, which was something I only sort of came across recently, which I was quite surprised by, is actually I realise now there's quite a strong connection between Brian Catling and Alan Moore. I don't know if any of you are particularly familiar with basically the leading comic book writer in Britain is this Alan Moore, particularly famous for writing the Watchmen comic. He's also particularly famous as a very eccentric mysticist of his own, which comes across in a lot of his work. And I was just reading very recently Alan Moore's book From Hell, which is all about the Ripper murders in the Whitechapel area of London in the 18th century. And to my great surprise, in the middle, there is at least an extract or a short poem by Brian, which is all about knives. I believe it was called The Stumbling Block. And I don't know if it's a complete poem or just an extract. It's all about knives. And I mean, because in the comic book, within each chapter starts with some little extracts of historical books or some extracts of text. But Brian's was the one little text which completely rung true with the disturbing mysticism which is at the heart of Alan Moore's writing in this particular book. So that's my take on Brian's work. You can totally disagree.
You do know he wrote the preface.
Sorry?
You do know he wrote the preface for a recent book. Do you not know that?
No.
Ah.
Well, Alan Moore wrote the preface.
Now, my recent book, he wrote the preface.
Oh, right, yeah.
So you're right.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm proved.
but I shave.
All right.
And I don't believe in snake gods.
No, he's a little bit on. I think Alan Moore's a little bit on one extreme of a continuum on which I think you belong.
Thank you. Let's talk about something else.
Yes.
Well, about mysticism, or I mean, I think there was kind of a ritual kind of aspect in your work. I mean, like these objects and like doing a little ritual with these objects, or at least in my interpretation, also probably because I put all this context about the church here, and then you also made this kind of devil sign, and there's a psychological disturbance in my interpretation as well. For me, it was, I think it was very rich in a lot of sense, so you can kind of interpret it in a lot of different ways, but my main interpretation is a lot about guilt and hiding it. It's about like, oh, so there's this devil coming out, but then I have to block myself out. So a lot also about self-destruction, which was very strong at the last part where you put all this really loud and really high-pitched sound systems on yourself, and also visually also blocking yourself, but also like this camera as if it was an object of desire or something that is interesting, but at the same time it's something forbidden, so you kind of have to hide. At the end you just have to destroy it. It's, for me, those were kind of the things I could see into it, or that made sense for me or gave me.
I think I've stuttered. I think rituals is something we do every day, every hour, every moment. They're kind of things that kind of bind us together. So when you take one outside and you extend it, or you isolate it, or you say, this is not a normal ritual, it's very particular. And I'm very interested in the way that there's a bipolar thing here, that sometimes people see exactly the things you saw as being introverted, as being attacking and extroverted. So sometimes they're the same thing, and I think if you can kind of balance them so they go backwards and forwards, if you want to ask an audience a question, the best question is about them. Do you know why people don't clap in church? And I should have said this before, but it goes back to the Greek, it's been traced back to Greek mythological times before the great mythologies were invented, that people were a tribal society and used tribal magic. When the magical act was performed by the men, and it often was, the women and children were kept inside. And so the magical act was performed outside. They covered themselves in white clay, titanium, the Titans. So they became white creatures. And they made the special act to hold the society together and to keep it. And then, so they could come back into their families, and their families could come back to them. They broke the airwaves. And if you break airwaves, you stop something. If you don't do that, you take it home with you. And it still works. That's why people don't like clapping in the church service or a religious service, because it actually takes something away. It breaks the spell and brings things back to normality.
also involved. I think I was in Venezuela once where I took some pictures, and he didn't want me to take pictures of him because he was in the old tradition of you take the soul of someone. And I agree that it's a ritual you're making and sacrificing. So I also felt a little bit offended when you took the picture of us here. This was okay, but when you put it to your heart, I was a little bit, do I want to go so close? Of course it's my own, but this was what came to me.
Who was it who said they didn't want to be photographed?
I was in Venezuela, and I met some guys who was a little bit in the Indian tradition.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take some pictures of them, and they didn't allow me. Because in the old days, they thought when the white people came and took a picture that you take their soul.
Yeah, that's a really interesting piece of mythology. I think it was actually invented by white people. I've tried to find some origin of this idea of the soul being stolen. It is adopted, it is used by different people throughout the world. They don't want it to happen. But I think the broadcasting of the fact that the photograph could take the soul was not something that was made by people who had never seen a camera. I think it was invented by people who understood cameras very clearly.
I don't know, he just said it. And I took a picture of her. It was when he lay with his girlfriend in sleep, and he took the film out. For me, it was a princess. But I thought about it also when you eat the film. It was also a little bit so now we are in your stomach also. So in one way we got really the spiritual feeling of when you eat also the sacrifice.
But also,
me, but very, I could see that it put my antenna out. Yes, no, yeah. So
but
I got involved even if you got me involved even if you didn't ask.
I think photography has become safer with digital photography because it doesn't contain fluids and darkness. You don't have to go into a room, put your hands in wet fluids in the dark. All of these strange processes attached to photography up to like 15 years ago. Now it's something we don't understand. It's a box, and the image goes in one and it comes out the other. So all of that ritualistic thing of photography that went before was always attached to these notions of spirit photography, photographing emanations, the possibility of gathering non-visual information inside this box. So I think the camera was born with a kind of a mythology already attached. And I think it will go away because I think digital photography, there's no ghost in that machine. It wasn't there at the beginning, and I don't think it'll be there at the end. I could be wrong, it could be a new ghost. There always were, always welcome.
Still at least in the mind, even if it's already a little bit old-fashioned, because it's so digital and you expect it comes up immediately.
Yeah, it's and something like what's it called? What's the manipulative thing? The program I use it all the time. Photoshop. That's completely normal to us. What we're doing. Now, if you put someone in the dark room doing that with a red light, you might think it was a bit sinister or a bit peculiar. We can do it on this box of illumination because it's a pure thing and think nothing of it. So that there are little things being broken and rearranged, which I find really interesting. Yesterday I was in the National Museum. I was very interested in early archaeology and pre-Iron Age things. And there are things in there which you could see the same way of us gathering things, like a camera, but it's a bone. It's a bone that has an inscription. But it's about holding a time to it. It's about making a mark to keep a piece of evidence. And that, of course, is full of incredibly magical objects. And you don't actually need to know, you don't need to read the labels to feel it. although I must say there's a very, it's got a bit dramatic over the years, the presentation. It's practically a film. Yeah.
Could you say a bit more about the connection between like the breaking open of the camera and the eating of the film, and then were they rape alarms that you put onto your balaclava?
You knew what they were.
Were they?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I suspect there's not too many people here would know what they are. They're rape alarms. It's a little box that, this is an English phenomenon. That when you go to university, they will probably give you one of these boxes. And you put it in your pocket, and if you're walking down the street and you're raped, you pull this thing, and it makes a noise. Then it sounds like a car. So completely useless. I've not got a single female friend who's ever owned one of these things. So it's a strange invention. Now it's become something you actually don't know what it is. So the connection. The truth is, I don't really know the connection. I don't thread meanings onto a string. I find certain energies and certain actions. And when I saw this, and when I knew about this, and I had the invitation to come here, and knew about the acoustics, and knew about it was a church, those stuff, you would be very close. These are kind of basic, kind of mechanical facts. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring the two things together. And I suppose in terms of meaning, the stealing, the taking, the collecting of you, turning into something which is then a kind of attack back, or a kind of a sound which fills the room louder. They wanted to make it a connection. The connection is not they're of the same vibration. They have a resonance. If it works for me, the resonance is similar. So the resonance of the ideas are similar, rather than, I don't think I make symbols. I'm interested in metaphoric things, because they're more, well, it's a more female way of doing things, and it's a more kind of flexible, intelligent way of doing things. Symbols are rather, you carry them on sticks. I don't really want to do that. I want to make things which are speculative. That sounds like I sidestepped the question, but it's the truth. We probably want to eat and drink something now.
I just have this thought. There's this American writer, and he was blogging about Peace, a Swedish choreographer, where he had a lot of dancers exchange places with a symphonic orchestra, and then all the dancers were playing long symphonies even though they didn't know how to actually play instruments. So it produced this super noisy space, and they kept on playing and taking it very serious. And then Andrew was writing that for him it was this, and I kind of got the same reference in your performance. He was writing about how the human being is this extremely noisy organism, that even when we don't literally produce sound, we're always putting out signs and producing states of being and desires. So we're these really noisy beings that communicate all the time. And when you put all these alarms in your head and you're walking around and I could hear you, I was like, oh my god, this is the most noisy being I've ever. So for me it was a really nice sort of...
I hadn't considered that, but I do think that way. Yes, I entirely agree. I mean, animals can hear us coming a long way.
Yeah,
you know? But I think the interesting thing about that sound is that if it had just gone on, the human brain then starts to make patterns. So this discordant sound starts to turn into music, starts to turn into words. You start to put patterns, and it starts to mean things, which is really worrying. Because we're so good at that. We're so good at forming all kinds of different visual and sound stimulus into some kind of pattern that can talk to us directly. It's a kind of central fascism, really. That we insist that the world, in the end, is doing something for us.